happen here. So please, a nice Naples welcome to Erin Lee.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I currently live in Colorado, but I'm actually from Sarasota. We moved there, so it's awesome to be invited home. Thank you, Carol and Jimmy, for having me here. 6 years ago, I didn't understand why we moved there. People said, "Why'd you move to Colorado?" I said, "I have no idea." I now understand that we were meant to go through what we went through. So hold on to your seats. I'm going to break your heart, and then I'm going to give you some resources so that that does not happen here in Florida. So May of 2021, my journey started from being woke to awakened. I actually went to FGCU. I studied to be a teacher. They indoctrinated me, just like they've indoctrinated teachers around the country. And May of 2021, my 12-year-old daughter, she just turned 12. We just moved to a new town. It's the height of COVID. In Colorado, it was draconian lockdowns. They have our kids masked, distanced. They can't go to school. My daughter had not made a single friend her age. And one regular Tuesday, her art teacher asked her to stay after school for an art club in the art room. She texted us and we gave our permission, but when she got there, it was actually a secret gender and sexuality awareness club, or GSA. And the art teacher had invited in outside predators. So a woman who runs an organization called Skittles for kids aged 2 to 10 to talk about gender and sex, and Splash for kids 11 and up to talk about gender and sex outside the purview of their parents. She talked about, she used flags and described different umbrella terms, telling the kids if you're not completely comfortable in your biological sex or in your body, that means you're transgender. She asked these 11 and 12-year-olds about their sexual attraction, and when my daughter didn't know, she said, "Well, that means you're queer." And she gave her the queer flags and stickers and bracelets and celebrated her for proclaiming that she was now trans and queer. They talked about things like polyamory, which as a 36-year-old woman at the time, I had to Google, that's multiple sexual partners at once. They talked about suicide, telling the kids that these new labels make them more likely to kill themselves. She talked about puberty blockers and how to access them, which in the state of Colorado, they've lowered the mental health care consent age to 12. So my 12-year-old daughter could see a prescribing doctor actually in her school to access puberty blockers without my knowledge or consent. They connected my daughter online with dangerous predators on Discord and WhatsApp, these channels where they know parents are not monitoring the conversation. And they repeatedly reiterated that parents might not be safe and that it's okay to lie to your parents about your identity and about these meetings. In fact, as my daughter left the room that day, her art teacher pulled her aside and said, "Remember, you don't have to tell your parents." Thank God my daughter came home and told us what happened. She was excited to proclaim that she was transgender. And I, at the time, was pretty woke. And I didn't know what to do with this. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know how to react. But she fell deep into this identity. One 90-minute meeting that was, prefaced by years of trans indoctrination in the schools led to a very dark and scary year for my family. I took her to a therapist thinking, okay, I don't know how to handle this. I don't understand what she's going through. And I found out the hard way that in the state of Colorado, they passed a law in 2019 that banned conversion therapy with explicit language around gender-confused youth. So the therapist was legally obligated to affirm her confusion. That made her worse. She continued to spiral. So we took her to a faith-based therapist who knew that she was bound by the law and would not touch the issue, which further exacerbated my daughter's confusion and depression to the point that December of 2021, 6 months after the art club meeting, she left us a suicide note. She had become so confused. She was a mess. She didn't know how to live in the body that God had given her. So while we're fighting for our daughter's life at home, like literally fighting for her life, I woke up every morning and went to her room wondering if she would be alive. At 12 years old, this is a little girl who ate mac and cheese and slept with her teddy bear. An innocent baby girl. They stole her innocence, and I couldn't give it back. So I fought back. The next day, we pulled her out of the school. Like, no way she's going back to that school. They have wrecked my daughter. They have wrecked my family. And 2 days after the art club incident, they sent a mandated reporter to my home in lieu of Child Protective Services to ensure that we were not abusing our daughter, to ensure that we were affirming her gender confusion. Now, thank God this was a God-fearing man who sympathized with us, who cried with my husband. He said, as a dad of a daughter, I don't know how I could go through this. And so he prevented CPS from removing my children forcibly from my home for not affirming. But he couldn't help us. He couldn't change anything. He confirmed it was a confidential meeting because as a public school, they must provide a safe space for our children. So a safe space from their parents. I stood before the school board. I cried. Like, please, how did this happen? What's going on? Is this happening to other kids? How do I stop it? All 7 school board members, it took 3 months for anyone to respond to my repeated follow-up calls, emails, standing before them. And when I finally got to sit down with the school board member, it turns out she's a volunteer with Skittles and Splash. That she was proud of what had happened. That she believes there are an infinite number of genders. It's not binary, and we should be teaching children these concepts as young as 5. So I called the police. Because if this had happened outside of the school setting, that would have been my first call. This was sexual abuse of an innocent little girl. And because there was no physical touch or exposure of body parts, there's nothing they could do. It took about a year to get my daughter out of what I believe is a cult, the gender cult. These activists were contacting her. She had fallen into the internet. And we removed all the influences. We took her out of the school. We cut off the friendships. We cut off the influence. And when she finally started to come out of the darkness, and I believe that the Lord intervened. You know, we were not people of faith. I was a sleepwalking mom and a lazy Christian before this happened. I was raised Methodist. I did not have a relationship. But he reached in and intervened with our family. And about 9 months after the incident, she started to come out of the dark cloud. It actually took my husband having a really direct, hard conversation. Like, is this really what you want? Do you want to shave your head? Do you think we don't support you? And she was relieved. She was waiting for that off-ramp, for us to give her an out from this cult to stop being transgender. So fast forward to today, she's now a happy, healthy 15-year-old little girl who is no longer searching the world for her identity. She's comfortable with who she is. But about a year after the incident, we let her watch What is a Woman, the Matt Walsh documentary. And if you haven't seen it, highly recommend you watch it. She said, Mom, why didn't I understand this was happening to me while it was happening? I said, well, they took advantage of you. You were vulnerable. That's by design. And she said, how do we make sure this doesn't happen to other little girls? Right. And I said, you have to let me tell your story. I think we need to talk to someone. And my cousin, who's actually really good friends with Alex Newman, introduced me to this journalist I'd never heard of. And I shared my story, and he said, Erin, this is a big deal. I think this is going to blow up. And I said, yeah, I don't know who you are. That's funny. And it did. I went all the way to Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson and lots of Newsmax. And in doing that, I found that this is a very pervasive, prevalent issue. 4 other families just from that art club alone came forward who had no idea their daughters had attended. One little girl, the same week my daughter was suicidal, drank bleach and almost died. And they had no idea. They were blaming themselves. Like, where did we go wrong? How did this happen? Why is she so confused? She was, polyamorous, and she was bisexual, then she was pansexual, then she was transgender. She was trying all the identities, and they had no idea where she was learning it. She had been taught to tell her parents it was anime club. And since then, thousands of families have come forward from around the country. Right here in Florida, I've talked to families in Texas, rural Nebraska, Wisconsin. Just because you live in a conservative area that, I'll be honest, the schools are not as bad as they are in Colorado, does not mean that you're immune. This is happening to hundreds of thousands of families. In fact, every single one of you knows someone who's been affected by this transgender contagion. It is happening in crazy, crazy numbers.